Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Hey, Youth Worker on Fire. This is Doug Edwards, your host for Youth Worker on Fire. And today we're going to talk about life on fire. First of all, my life was about music. Grew up as a carpenter's son, builder's son. Dad was an entrepreneur. And my mom would work in between, making sure that we had enough money in between low times. Because when you do building, you have your own business, you're going to have high times, you're going to have low times, things like that. But fourth grade, I found out that I was, everybody found out that I was a little bit talented. And so I won a contest at my elementary school when they had tryouts, and my parents didn't know I could sing, and I won the contest. And my seventh grade year, I started playing trumpet and became a solo, sixth grade year actually. In my seventh grade year, I started doing solo work. Not a whole lot of big stuff, but still I was used to performing, so we played some things. Then got to high school, I asked Christ into my heart and got into a band because they had heard that I had asked Jesus in my heart, and they were a couple seniors, I was a freshman. And so we started performing on the weekends and whenever we could. And so my sister Deborah started accompanying us. Did our first national tour that year because somebody picked us up and said, listen, we'll pay your way. We need you guys to be a part of this choir tour. And so we would drive down to Gastonia, North Carolina, and practice every Sunday after church. And which is a couple hours, about 3 hours round trip every Sunday for quite a while. So we did our first and national tour, coast to coast, North Carolina to California, all up through the Northwest as well, all the way over to Washington, Oregon. And so went into music in college, thought, well, I'll make it a career because I love music, and that's really what I want to do most. I want to make albums, and I want to be in a recording studio, and I want to be on the road and play. And so I ended up in a band in college, on top of all the other bands that you had to be in for classes and things like that. We had a band that would perform every weekend. We'd finish our classes on Friday. We would take off that evening. We'd come back late Sunday night. And that was my course of life for 4 years. And then got a call from a guy called Mr. B, and Mr. B, after graduation, and I was scrambling and wondering, the band had broken up and what I was going to do now, and decided I'd go back and try to get my educational certificate. I avoided education because I did not want to be I did not want to be a teacher. Didn't want to work in the school system. I wanted to do everything I could to avoid that, so I did not do any education courses. So a guy by the name of Mr. B, who was a band director down in South Carolina, just over the border from North Carolina. I can't remember the name of the town right now, but I get a phone call from him, and he said, hey, my name is Mr. B, and God has a wonderful plan for your life, and it's not in the church. I said, what? Really? Okay, I'm listening. And so he told about what he did. He's a band director there, but he also had a Bible study in the evening, and he was leading more students to Jesus than the churches in the area. I said, well, that's cool. Maybe this is the course that God's got for me. I go over down there and do the interview, but I didn't have a certificate. He knew that he found that out after I told him, and he said, well, let me see what I can do. And he checked with the state, and he could not talk them into letting me get my certification while I was teaching with him. And once again, God will bait. I hate to call it this because some people will be offended by this, but God will bait and switch you. And so that's what he did with me. He baited and switched me because I started going through the educational route. Then I got very sick because I didn't quit the 3 jobs I had after college, just trying to make ends meet. And I added college to that. And so finally my body just burned out and burned up. And my doctor told me that, hey, you got to go take some rest somewhere. So I took 2 weeks, went to Louisiana. Barksdale Air Force Base was where my brother-in-law and sister were located, Bossier City, right outside of Shreveport, Louisiana. So I went there and I literally slept for 2 weeks. I would get up for like breakfast and get up for lunch and for supper, and then I would just go back to bed. And one of those weekends, though, my brother-in-law said, listen, let's go to Oklahoma City. There's a church there that's very innovative, and they grew very rapidly, and I think it's someplace you'd like to go see. And so we went to see it, and it was pretty amazing. Church had grown to 3,000 in 3 years, in a place called Edmond, Oklahoma. They had a school of ministry there that they had started. I thought, well, okay, well, maybe I need to do that, but wasn't sure. And there was a band playing that Sunday morning, band by the name of Daybreak. Bill Flanders owned the band, literally owned it. He was at Peter Lord's church as their music director and discipleship director for many, many years in Titusville, Florida. But this church had hired him to come out and do the music out there. Said, yeah, you can bring the band. That can be part of your music life. And so whenever the band was off the road, they'd play at the church. And so went up and talked to him and said, hey, great band, sounds really good. And, I'm interested in maybe, auditioning for you guys sometime or something like that. I don't even remember if I said that. I got a phone call about a week or two later. I said, hey, listen, we'd really like for you to join the band. We need another trumpet player. Why don't you come on out? And I said, well, okay, well, let me pray about it. Let me think about it, because I was in school now. I hadn't finished my educational certification, and things kind of confusing. But I knew that was my dream, and so kind of got panicky after a while. There was no cell phones. There was no texting. There's none of this stuff. And the guy I was trying to get in touch with, Jack, I can't even remember Jack's last name right now. And by the way, Jack's the one who told Bill, hire this guy. Whatever you do, just hire him because he's good. And Milton Lowe, who was in that first Christian band I was in, he was the other trumpet player, great trumpet player. He was in seminary at Asbury Seminary, and also in the jazz band. And Jack, he told Jack, he said, listen, he is good. Hire him. Don't even think about it. Just hire him. And so they did. Went on the road for 6 months, got a great, loved it. We're performing 7 days a week. We're going 6 weeks at a stretch. Then you get a weekend or a few days off, and then we'd hit another 6 weeks, 7 days, traveling 600 miles a day most of the time. Unless we're in the state of Florida, then it was real short hops here and there because we were known well in Florida. And so got a big deal in Nashville through a guy by the name of John Coates, who was a big songwriter at that time. Not songwriter, but he was an arranger. And so he would go through and he would script out all the parts for bands and do different arrangements for songs, that sort of thing. And he was a friend of our band and felt like he had a big break for us. And unfortunately, the break broke us. Guy said, don't worry, hey, you don't need a contract or anything. It's my word is my bond. Those are not good words, especially in Christianity, I think. Should be, but they're not. So he said, cancel all your bookings. Get back on the, get back with me. We'll book my bookings in with you. And then what you can do is rebook your stuff once we've got all my bookings down, because you're going to be my backup band. He was a well-known guy. And so, he was going to take us, catapult us to the being known very quickly because of his name and being with him on the road. And so cancel all of our bookings. 2 weeks later, we get a call. I am so sorry. I feel horrible, but we have decided to go with another band. And then we were somewhere, had another concert we were doing, and our owner flew in or came in and stayed up with us that night, and he said, guys, we've got to shut it down. He said, we'd had a bus that broke down, had to buy another bus, and then we lost our bookings. It took years to get some of these guys on tap to where we'd have them to be booked by, and so we were, hand to mouth. We were, every concert mattered, every offering that was taken or amount that was paid was there to pay the bills, to pay us, to pay, for the maintenance of the bus and that sort of thing. And we didn't stay in luxurious hotels. Most of the time we stayed in homes within the churches or organizations or whoever we were playing for. But while I was on tour, I remembered one kid coming up to me. I was not much more than a kid myself. I was around 23. And he was in college. We were at South Florida on the West Coast side. What's the name of that town? Can't think of it right now. But we're at a community college. There's community college. Now they're called state colleges here in Florida. We played that day in the open air of this state college or community college. And this guy comes up to me and he says, hey, he said, you guys are talking about this Jesus thing. Do I have to be a drug addict or something like that before I ask Jesus into my heart? And I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, I just heard that only really bad people who have gone through some really bad things can actually, have this relationship with God or something like that. I said, no, not at all. So I explained to him how he could ask Jesus in his heart. And that gave me a clue. My brain started changing, my heart. God was doing it. Once again, this bait and switch thing. And this is before the band broke up, of course. And I started thinking, you know what? We're hitting these places and we might come back a year later, 2 years later, whatever, play them again, but they're going to be different people. And I'm wondering what's happened to these people once they ask Jesus into their heart, these students especially. And just a thought that's flashed through my head because I knew that my career was supposed to be in music. That's where all my accolades were in high school, in college, in my community. So I ended up, could not figure out how to start another band. Anything I tried musically just was going flat. I didn't know how to persevere and how to do different things to make a band work or to have a solo act. Now what I've told my son, who's in the music industry, is a songwriter. And your best thing to do if you're a musician, if you want to keep going, is to start your own band. You be the talent, whether you're mediocre or great, because there's a lot of mediocre guys and gals that have made it and look great in the music world and made a lot of money. There's somebody out there that's going to like you, whether you're mediocre or not. Bob Dylan, remember, had the worst voice in the world. I mean, go back and listen to any of Bob Dylan's stuff, but he was a great songwriter. And he was a solo act. In fact, I don't know if he did Woodstock, but he did a lot of the things in the 70s. In fact, yesterday was the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. My wife and I were watching that. That was 1969, my freshman year when I asked Jesus in my heart. Somewhere in there, the Jesus movement started, and Woodstock was probably intended for, not for good, by the spiritual world, satanic world. God turns everything around for good, for his good, because he already sees the whole picture. The Jesus movement started. You go listen to Jay Strack on episode, I believe it's 11 and 12. I think I said 10 and 11 on one of the other episodes. But Jay was a product of the Jesus movement. He's a throwaway kid, been in 11 or so foster homes, drug addict, surfer boy, and it was through the Jesus movement that he, some way he came to know Christ. So Woodstock 50th anniversary yesterday, and that was the starting point of my Christian adventure over the decades. And so I had floundered around. I actually drove a truck in Oklahoma City for a mattress company. I remember I was trying to start bands. I was running out of money. I had no money after a while. And I went to one of the pastors. I said, what do I do? What do I do? I said, I don't want to jump into a job and then a band, thing works out and music and I, can't, I've got to quit my job. And he said, Scripture says, whatever your hands find to do, do it. I said, okay. So I went, found first job I could find, driving a truck at a mattress factory. Guys went to our church. So I would drive all the way downtown OKC, which was at least 35, 40-minute drive because we were at the north part of Oklahoma City, third largest square mile city in the world at that time. And so I remember I told him I could drive the truck because I'd get 25 cents more per hour. And he said, okay, we'll get in that 1-ton truck over there and back it up. I'm going, oh my gosh, it's stick shift. And the last time I drove a stick shift was my uncle's Corvette. And after I drove it one time, he says, no, that's enough. Because I grind about every gear. So I figured out, I was able to finally back this 1-ton truck up. So I made my extra 25 cents an hour. I had a personality, so eventually they put me on the sales floor. What they didn't realize, I was a lousy mattress salesman, but I was in there with a guy by the name of Jose. And Jose was originally from the Philippines, and he was always dressed in a suit. He could barely speak good English. And I was always down in the mouth, about this whole thing. My world is falling apart. Now I'm working in a mattress factory. Now I'm a salesman in a mattress factory. I'm sitting there half the day, and then somebody comes in, and I'm terrible at doing what I'm doing. And so I said, Jose, how do you have such a good attitude? He said, well, because wherever God puts me, I am happy to be. I'm happy to be wherever He's positioned me. It's His plan for my life. And I thought, oh, okay, that's really good. He said, I've learned to be content. I said, well, that's really good. I was convicted at that point, but I said, so what were you doing before this? He said, well, I was in charge of publications for Full Gospel Businessmen nationally. And I said, well, man, that is a big leap from there to here. I said, well, how are you handling that? And he said, well, here's the thing. He said, I'm getting to spend more time with my family than I have in years. So I am loving being a mattress salesman. And by the way, he was selling a lot of mattresses. He could barely speak English, but he had a great attitude. He just was one of those guys that you just want to buy from, you want to be around. And that was a big lesson that God showed me. Listen, Doug, start being okay with wherever you are and realize that whether you've put yourself there or I put you there, that be content because I'm still going to guide you in your life. Okay, all right. Still had to learn that lesson over and over and over and over again. Became a minister of music at that church for the next 6 months. God blessed me. And by the way, I had $5 in my pocket. I was in one of the services, and this is one thing about giving that I learned. I'd learned it years before I was even a Christian, at a camp where I had my last quarter, 50 cents or whatever it was, and that was our get a soda and some kind of food at night at the camp. And they said something about giving, what you had to the Lord or something like that. So I gave everything I had, and pastor was there, and Pastor Lang was the pastor at that time, and he said, Doug, do you have any money for snacks tonight? I said, no. I said, I gave it at I don't know why I told him that. I didn't know anything about keeping things to yourself. Humble. I wasn't even a Christian. I just went to church, And something happened, and he made sure I had money for the rest of the time, and he told my story at church or something like that. I mean, it was, but I noticed that, I gave everything I had and ended up with a whole lot more. And that lesson kept coming up in my life. So I was in the service, had $5 left to my name, and I believe this was actually before I got the first job at the mattress factory. No, it wasn't. It was before I got the job at the church. And so I heard in my spirit God saying, okay, the offering's coming around. Give me your $5. And I said, no. And he says, give me your $5. I said, I want to eat lunch afterwards. I'm really hungry. I want to be with my friends. Give me your $5. So I put my last $5 bill in the offering. Immediately after church, some of my friends said, listen, we're going to take you out to eat today. Wow, okay, all right. That's kind of cool. The next thing that happens is within the week or 2 weeks, it must be a 2-week theme or something like that, I get a call and or the pastor brings me to the office or something. He said, because I had assisted Bill Flanders, and Bill ended up leaving the church and going to Dallas or Fort Worth, somewhere like that, in a business, not even in a ministry this time. And I'd filled in for him a couple of times. And they said, listen, we'd like you to be our temporary minister of music. And then maybe possibly with a full-time position, we'll see how it works out. So I got to sing in front of a lot of famous people because every band in the United States, especially out of Nashville, would come through Oklahoma City. We were known as the fastest growing church in America at that time, 3,003 years. Funny thing is, it tapped out years later at 5,000, which is kind of a medium church in America compared to some of the mega churches that have happened, 60, 70,000 or more people in them. which is Saddleback in North Point in Georgia, Atlanta, Alpharetta. And so I really thought something was going to come out of this. One of the guys, Russ Taff, came up to me after I led music before he and his band called the Imperials. I think he started off with Truth or something like that. You guys don't know the names of these bands. If you're younger, the older guys do. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, "You got a great voice. Thank you so much." Well, it was the peak of when my voice was actually getting better. We were singing. They actually put me in as a vocalist, a solo vocalist on certain songs. And so I'd play trumpet, but then I'd sing. And you're doing this 6 days a week. And so at that age, your chops, everything, your vocals, your trumpet, all these things, your instruments are getting better. And I remember I could read music better than I ever had before. And I didn't even have to read a lot. It's just we had to memorize and get our shtick down, the songs that we had. And there were about 30 of them, 30 songs that we had to have ready at all times. And I thought, okay, well, something's going to happen. Well, ends up through a misunderstanding, and I didn't even know how it happened. The pastor blocks me and doesn't fire me, but knows how to put the pressure on by just alienating me so that I will end up resigning. And I didn't know enough to not resign and to demand some things, which I should have. By the way, you need a contract, guys. If you're at a church, you need to have some demands up front. He said, "Well, Doug, this is a church. We want to do Jesus' work." Well, I get it, but I found that churches will take advantage of you. Not all churches, but some churches will take advantage of you if you don't know your value. And by the way, that church in Oklahoma, I blurted out a number. It was too little to live on. I didn't know that, but I was living on so little when I was in the band and used to being in poverty, even though my dad had money. I tried to make everything on my own, and I had to pay my dues in the music industry. And so I could barely pay my rent. I had to get a roommate, which was great. He was a great roommate. And I had to, we finally got a vehicle because I had the job. And so I was hand to mouth. And the guy before me was getting paid $40,000 a year. He had a family. I get it. I got paid $7,000 because I didn't know my worth. And you never say money first. If they ask you how much you want to be paid, you never tell them. You wait. You skirt the issue, whatever, until they tell you how much they want to pay you, and then you'll know where to go from there. And if they're not going to pay enough to live on, it's not the place for you. Unless God himself has said, we're going to work this out. You just go. John Maxwell say, well, he never asked about salary when he went to a place. Leadership guy, Dr. John Maxwell. He said because he knew he was going to work far harder than the money he was going to be getting paid, and eventually they'll give you a raise, and he suggested we all do that. Well, to some degree, that's true. It happened at the last church I was at for 29 years. But in the process, I learned a big lesson, know your value, know how much you're worth. I just blurted out a number that I thought maybe I could live on. I didn't have a clue. Finance was not my big thing. Finance should be everybody's gig. I found out business and ministry should be everybody's gig. If you don't understand business, you will really have a rough time in ministry, and people will really take advantage of you. I learned enough through Youth for Christ. The process, I left there, went home, said, "Dad, listen, I'm going to build houses with you," because I'd come home at that point and I said, "I'm broke. I've tried things my way. I thought they were God's way, but things aren't working out. I want to be a builder with you, and we're just going to build and do whatever we need to do." And my dad would have loved that. But in his wisdom, he said, "Son, you don't know that." I said, "Well, you tell me what to do, and we'll do whatever you want to do." So immediately we went and got a loan in my name, bought a house, which I didn't live in. We bought it to either rent out or sell. And so I took that summer and painted the house. And in the meantime, I flew to a camp down in Florida via Oklahoma. Youth pastor there said, "Why don't you come down and assist us? We know you're going through some rough times, and we'd like for you to do that." And so I did. Flew down there, changed my plane flights 3 times because of a misunderstanding with a friend I was going down to see early. Billy Noyes, by the way, what a name. That was our sound guy in the band originally. and Billy's down in Titusville, and the camp was going to be in Titusville. And so Billy's very quiet, so I never can read him. So I said I wasn't going to, I thought I was going to go. Then I got a plane ticket. Then I listened to him, sound like he didn't really want me there. So I canceled my plane ticket. Didn't even ask him. And he said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I want you to come." "Okay." Well, so I changed my plane ticket again. Ended up with a 6-hour layover, in Atlanta. Best layover of my life. I saw people I had not seen in years. I never saw anyone in an airport whenever I would fly that I knew. So I ended up seeing Rick Eldridge. Rick is on my previous episodes. And "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just in between things, trying to figure out what God's doing in my life." "So what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm going down to this organization, Youth for Christ, and do that." And in the meantime, he'd gotten married to Krista and different things like that. And so a couple of weeks later, once again, I'm terrible at auditioning. If I audition for something, I usually don't get it. I'm terrible at interviewing. If I interview, I usually don't get it. And so usually everything with me comes, somebody said something, "Hey, he really does good over here. He's great over here. You need to hire him." That's been the story of my life, my entire life. And so I get a call from Youth for Christ, and they said, "Listen, Rick Eldridge recommended you. Would you come down and let's interview and do whatever?" And Rick had already given him the lowdown, I guess. So went and saw them. I had 2 other stops to make, Victoria, Texas, and also Bossier City, where we First Baptist there had talked about hiring me as an assistant in the music department. So ended up going with Youth for Christ in Orlando, and Florida was not even on my map. I really didn't particularly like Florida or the idea of Florida until I went on tour with the band, and Florida became a cool place. We spent quite a bit of time here in those 6 months. So I interviewed, started praying about it, decided, yep, this is the place I need to go, because I thought I was going to be doing music with Youth for Christ, bait and switch, remember? He will send you one place so he can get you where you need to be. I don't know why he does that unless we're just so stubborn. Now, I am stubborn. I've figured out how stubborn I am over the years. My wife reminds me that I'm stubborn. Sure enough, I end up in Youth for Christ. I say yes to the mess, and it was a mess. Ended up being the worst Youth for Christ program in the United States. The guy doing it was a great speaker, but he was a lousy boss and a lousy executive. So much in Youth for Christ, unless it's something really, really bad, never get rid of an executive director. And eventually they got rid of him. This guy would yell at us on a regular basis. I mean, scream. And because he started getting scared, they had raised $1 million and they were going through it like water because he'd hired too many staff. He didn't understand the whole process of Youth for Christ. He understood ministry in a church. And he ended up in a church and doing very well after that. But I ended up in Youth for Christ thinking I was going to do music. Ended up, I'm doing campus life programs. And for 3 years of the 6 years, I'm trying to find a way out. I'm trying to figure out how I can get back in the music industry and do this thing. And a few of my friends have been very successful with some very big bands. And so they became well-known, and they're well-known in the industry even today in the Christian and some in the secular industry. I noticed one of them on Instagram, Facebook would be writing a lot of secular artists that we know in the field and things like that. So I ended up in student ministry, and after my 3rd, 4th year, I realized, okay, God, I get it. You're not going to bless me in music, but every time I do something student ministry, he would bless me. In fact, I used to say, stop blessing me. Don't bless me in student ministry. I don't want to do this, But God, in his wisdom, would not stop blessing me. When I would do an event, a lot of students would show up. People would show up to help work. Well, why? Well, student ministries, whether it's in a church or whether it's in the community as a whole, and I was developing a program in a place called Claremont, South Lake, actually, Claremont, Groveland, but mostly the money in Claremont, and now it's it's almost a metropolis. It's the north end of Disney. It's where a lot of Disney employees would live because it was like a paradise at that time. A bunch of art groves and a few houses, and now it's a bunch of houses and a few orange groves, and they've really expanded. But at that time, Claremont High School, Claremont Middle School, Groveland High School, Middle School, that sort of thing. And so my last 2 years, I actually kicked into gear. I even tried to go back and get my certification in education, just trying to run from this student ministry thing. And finally, when a guy by the name of Senator Dick Langley gave me money from his campaign. In fact, he did that twice over my last years there, because his 5 of 6 children ended up in the Campus Life program. A couple of them ended up volunteering for me, Stephanie and Jackie. And thank you, girls, if you ever hear this. And God gave me enough money to where I could actually date. For years, I couldn't even afford to date. Couldn't afford to go on a date. I could barely afford to live. There's times when my electricity was cut off in my house. This is doing God's will, okay? Being where you want me to be. And I was terrible at raising money at that time, but a lady by the name of Marilyn Preby really, Jim Pegg raised the first year or two's worth of money, but all the money didn't come through, and so I didn't get paid part of the time. And then Marilyn Preby, thank you, Johnny, for loaning Marilyn to me. She really knew how to do programming, and she loved people, and she really was a salesperson, whether she knew it or not. We started raising enough money, and part of that was Dick Langley giving Senator Langley, House of Representative first, then Senator, giving me the leftovers, because that's what they have to do. If there's anything left of the fundraising for their campaign, they have to give it to a charitable organization. So it was then that I met Colleen, my wife, when I started getting paid to where I could actually pay my bills, afford to actually go out. History was born. Met Colleen by my 6th year in student ministry. We got married in November 10th, and of 84 and 85. I resigned my position because my trainer, Andy McDaniel, who was the first guy I felt like I actually was learning, and first guy who told me, "Yeah, Doug, you're actually doing things right. You're doing what national training taught you to do, and you're doing good here." And he gave me confidence because I knew he knew what he was doing. He had developed other places before and continued to do that. And now he's in a college ministry up in Grand Rapids State College as a chaplain for sports. And so I was going to follow him down to Miami, which is where he moved to after a bad deal went down in Orlando in student ministries for him, on the administrative end. And I told him, I said, if he leaves, I'm leaving. And I did, resigned. Thought I was going to follow him because I felt like I was learning so much from Andy. And then this church calls me, Trinity Church up in Trinity Evangelical Free Church up in Eustis, Florida. I go to see them just out of obedience to God. Okay, well, I got to call God, so I'm going to go and see what this is about. And I told him no after we'd met. I said, no, I'm really not interested in doing student ministry in a church. And I left them that day, and God started haunting me. That's my words. One of my pastors said, "Hey, God doesn't haunt you." I said, well, sure felt like he was haunting me. So I called him back a few weeks later because I knew they were looking at other guys, talking to them. I said, "Did you find a youth pastor yet?" And they said, "Well, no, not yet. We got some other guys we're talking to." I said, "Well, I don't know why, but would you like to meet again?" And they said, "Sure. Listen, we'll go on a retreat and act like you're a pastor." So this church, who couldn't afford one pastor, had hired 3 pastors or 2, and they were getting ready to hire me. After I went and did the weekend, we talked about, what would you do if you were come in here and do student ministry, and how would this fit? And they hired me. I knew this is where God wanted me to be. And so that's how we ended up for 29 years in a place that we had no intentions of being, in a ministry we absolutely did not want to be a part of, which was in a church ministry. We love church. We love the church. But I saw how pastors were abused when I was growing up. I saw how their children were angry because of the way that they were treated. And a lot of them were my friends. And I saw how youth workers, volunteers were treated horribly. And I just saw some bad stuff, even though I love Jesus and love the church. I just didn't want to be on the inside of all that because I knew it looked just pretty painful and pretty rotten. But this church took financially great care of us for a long time. We didn't make tons of money, but made a lot more money than most people would have in this area. But we fought the fight. We went into public school systems called Youth for Christ to train me. The things I believe that Campus Life, Youth for Christ, Youth Guidance taught us was exactly what every church needs to be doing with their student ministry. And some churches are actually doing that now across the United States. And I think it is because of Youth for Christ and Young Life and Fellowship of Christian Athletes and Navigators and Campus Crusade for Christ, which is called Crew now. And in fact, you can listen to those guys Amanda Stevens, and her husband are on 3 episodes near the beginning, and they're amazing episodes. He is in charge of evangelism and more than 1,600 chapters of Campus Crusade, which is CRU, CRU now, across the United States, and summer missions around the world. Has an amazing story. And so those organizations, I believe, have molded church ministry when they realize, wait a minute, the reason they're doing these ministries is because we're not doing everything we're supposed to be doing in the church. Most churches don't think that way. They don't understand that. They just kind of hire and fill in a spot and figure it's not going to last long, but it's because they hire and fire. You know, my story kept developing, and until those last 5 years and last actually 10 years, before I left the church, 10, 12 years, there was an uprisal. They wanted to get rid of the pastor. This is our 3rd senior pastor since I had been there, and I didn't like some things he's doing. You know, when you have a church of a lot of leaders, and we had a lot of leaders in the church at that time, sometimes they will try to lead when they don't have the right to lead in certain ways. They go over and above what they're supposed to be doing in a negative way. And it happened to Charles Stanley. It's happened in other places. And sure enough, they tried to have a coup and get the pastor out. Instead, they ended up leaving, and a segment stayed, but the church was never the same. The people who left were never the same. You know, there's not a win-win. When you have that kind of problem in a church, that kind of breakup, nobody wins. There's wounds everywhere. It's war. And it is not a physical and mental war like we think it is. It is a spiritual war. Remember, it says what we're fighting is not flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And that the weapons that we fight with are not the weapons of this world, but that they're to tear down strongholds. And so we've got these things in our life. I remember one guy saying, don't you think we should get rid of the pastor? Well, I'm one of the pastors. And I'm going, I can't say that. And I said, I'm one of the pastors. It would be wrong of me to do that. I said, but if you guys want to know what you're doing is right or wrong, you need to fast and pray. I said, have y'all fasted, about this and prayed? And he said, well, no. I said, well, until you do that, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. You've got to fast and pray. And then you ask God for him to do the moving or doing whatever he needs to do. But they didn't do that. I don't like fasting either, but I know that if I really want to see things happen when there's a barrier, that fasting is the way. So right now, 5 years after that ministry, I started, I was in a business, a health and wellness business. I still have ownership in that, but it was not making enough money. We had to go through some tough transitions, had to sell our house. We're living in a wonderful place now because of a thing called the 40-Day Prayer Challenge from the book, Draw the Circle, Mark Batterson. In our next episode, one of our episodes, I'm going to talk about prayer on fire and about the 40-Day Prayer Challenge. But right now, I remember Michael Helms coming into a Wendy's with my luncheon with my buddy. I hadn't seen Mike in a long time. One of my former students. He was in the arts and in the recording industry in New York and now in the Orlando area. We talked about podcasting, and a light bulb came on because I'd written a couple of books. I didn't know how to get them out. I didn't know how to get the money to pay to have them published. These 5 years have been tough. But as tough as they've been financially, as tough as they've been emotionally, and we've gone through our 3rd bout of cancer with my wife. She's doing well now, but it's like these things keep reoccurring. We're still in real human life on earth, and God is still God and still takes care of us. But this transition has been very, very difficult. We live in a place that is amazing. This office that I'm in right now is amazing. It's all because of the Draw the Circle 40-Day Prayer Challenge, which we'll talk about later. But that's life on fire right now. We're not done. We've got lots of things to do. I end up helping people with a lot of different transitions in life that we'll talk about at another time. Everything from weddings to funerals to counseling to keeping marriages together. Not even trying to lifting up pastors that were friends of mine. Some of them were former students of mine. And but that's it for Life on Fire. And that's my life on fire because God lit me on fire. It wasn't me lighting myself. It was him going, I'm going to flame you up so that you can fire up and so the world can see your light. That's Life on Fire. Youth Worker on Fire. Look at your life. Your life is on fire as well. And God is using you. Keep letting him use you. Keep running to him in conflict and when you're in pain. And there you go. Adios, Youth Worker Nation. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.